The Pursuit, a very strong DPS tower, finally got its long-awaited rework. Not only did it get a fresh updated design, it has completely new stats, a relocation ability, and is the first tower in TDS to have 2 upgrade paths. In this video, I'll be going over all the stat changes, values, and uses of this tower, then give my personal ranking of how good it is. This was a very complicated tower to review, so hit that like button and subscribe and let's get started. Its placement cost did not change, staying at 3,000 cash. That means this is still a late game tower, as it's much too expensively placed in the early game. It also now only has half the placement limit, decreasing from 10 to 5. The way it targets enemies is also completely different. Instead of flying around in a circle, stopping whenever an enemy is in range, there's a blue circle that the Pursuit can see enemies in. Whenever there's an enemy in range, it will trail after that enemy, firing at them until they either die or leave the blue range. If something does leave its range, you can use the relocation ability, which lets you select a spot anywhere on the map, moving the blue circle to that location. This gives the Pursuit technically full map range, and the ability has a cooldown of 20 seconds. It also now has limited ammo, which when depleted, causes the Pursuit to stop attacking and reload. Before I go over the stat changes, I just want to clarify that because of the fire rate bug in TDS, this tower actually deals slightly less DPS than what I'm going to show. However, it's a pretty small difference, so don't worry about it. Also, there were a ton of stats to look at, so I apologize in advance if I made any mistakes. Regardless, at level 0, its damage increased from 5 to 6, its fire rate stayed at 0.25, and now has a patrol range of 14, 35 ammo, a 3-second reload time, and its DPS went from 19.38 to 17.9. It has flying detection at every level. Keep in mind, the DPS I'm giving is considering the reload time. At level 1, its total cost increased from 3,900 to 4,200 cash, its damage and fire rate stayed the same, but it has 14 patrol range, 35 ammo, a 3-second reload time, and its DPS went from 31.01 to 23.8. It now gains lead detection. At level 2, its total cost increased from 5,550 to 6,050, its damage increased from 8 to 10, it has 16 patrol range, 35 ammo, a 3-second reload time, and its DPS went from 41.01 to 29.8. It used to gain missiles at this level, but it doesn't anymore. At level 3, its total cost increased from 10,050 to 10,800, and its damage doubled from 5 to 10, its fire rate increased from 0.085 to 0.2, its range increased from 9.5 to 10.5, it has a patrol range of 16, 75 ammo, and a 2.5 second reload time. It also now can shoot missiles at this level, which compared to the previous level 3 Pursuit, had their damage increased from 30 times 2 to 35 times 2, explosion radius decreased from 5 to 3, and the missile cooldown was increased from 6 to 7. Overall, its DPS went from 63.76 to 52.9. Now, level 4 is where we see the biggest change in this tower with the introduction of 2 upgrade paths. Once you upgrade one of them, you can't upgrade the other. First, let's take a look at the top path. At level 4, its total cost increased from 20,050 to 28,300, its damage increased from 8 to 10, its fire rate increased from 0.085 to 0.1, its patrol range is now 18.5, it has 150 ammo, and a reload time of 2.25. It also now has a rev up time of 1.5 seconds, meaning it doesn't attack immediately. Its missile damage increased from 30 times 4 to 35 times 4, its explosion radius decreased from 5 to 3, and its cooldown stayed at 6 seconds. Overall, its DPS went from 106.02 to 103.3. At level 5, its total cost increased from 45,050 to 63,300 cash, its damage more than doubled from 13 to 28, its fire rate stayed at 0.085, it has a patrol range of 21, 200 ammo, and a 1.75 reload time. Just like last level, it has a 1.5 second rev up time before shooting. Its missile damage decreased from 30 times 6 to 35 times 4, its explosion radius decreased from 5 to 4, and its cooldown stayed at 6 seconds. It also gets hidden detection, which the old Pursuit used to never have. Overall, its DPS went from 169.78 to 299.8. Now, before we can take a look at how good this path is, let's first take a look at the bottom path so that we can later compare the two. At level 4, its total cost increased from 20,050 to 24,300 cash, its damage increased from 8 to 10, its fire rate increased from 0.085 to 0.2, it has a patrol range of 17.5, 75 ammo, and a reload time of 2.25. Its missiles damage increased from 30 times 4 to 45 times 6, and the cooldown decreased from 6 to 5. Overall, its DPS went from 106.02 to 97.5. While this does look worse, keep in mind that this is single target DPS, and the bottom path focuses much more on splash damage. Finally, at level 5, its total cost increased from 45,050 to 64,300 cash, its damage increased from 13 to 20, its fire rate increased from 0.085 to 0.2, its range decreased from 12 to 10.5, it has a patrol range of 19.5, 75 ammo, and a reload time of 2.25. Its missiles damage increased from 30 times 6 to 60 times 8, their explosion radius increased from 5 to 6, and the cooldown decreased from 6 to 3.5. Overall, its DPS went from 169.78 to 207. Now that we've gone over the stats for every level, let's talk about how good this tower actually is. First of all, it may seem like it got a bit worse in the earlier levels, as its DPS and price got slightly nerfed. However, its new targeting system makes up for this. The Pursuit used to be considered a sub-DPS tower due to its very inconsistent targeting. It would fly around in a circle and stop when enemies were in range. It would not follow the first enemy and rather stay in one spot until no enemies were in sight. Now that it tracks enemies within the blue circle, following whatever targeting you have it set to, the pursuit is significantly more reliable, and you can track enemies anywhere on the map as long as you properly use its ability. So you can actually now use it as your only source of DPS instead of having to use it in combination with more reliable towers. In terms of single target DPS, its value isn't that great, with level 0 technically having the best value of 5.97 DPS per 1k spent. But once you start considering its splash damage, things get better. Because this is a very late game tower, I'm going to be mainly looking at the 2 max level pursuits. The top path focuses much more on single target DPS rather than dealing splash damage. It deals a combined 299.8 DPS for a total of 63,300 cash. However, since this tower is going to be used in the late game, let's assume its missiles are hitting at least 3 enemies at a time. It deals 23.3 DPS with just its missiles, so that gets tripled to 69.9 DPS. With this in mind, the pursuit deals an average of 346.4 combined DPS. That's a value of 5.47, which is pretty decent for such a high DPS. Since you can place 5 of them, that means the max DPS you can achieve is an average of 1,732. That's a ton of damage, especially for a tower with full map range and complete stun immunity. The bottom path focuses more on splash damage, making it a menace against crowds. It deals 87 single target DPS and 120 DPS with its missiles. The explosion radius of these missiles is bigger, so we could assume they hit even more than 3 enemies, but to keep things consistent, I'm just gonna stick with 3. That triples their DPS up to 360 and gives the pursuit a combined DPS of 447. That is insane, and for a total cost of 64,300 cash, that is a value of 6.95 DPS per 1k spent. That sounds pretty good, but for a splash attacking tower, it's alright. Still, with 5 max bottom path pursuits placed, you'll be dealing an impressive average of 2,235 DPS against crowds. In comparison, let's take a look at the mortar, which is often considered the strongest crowd control tower in the game. At max level, it does 114.03 DPS. That is a much bigger explosion size, so let's assume it hits at least 4 enemies. That gives it an average DPS of 456.12. That's slightly higher than our pursuit, but you can only place 4, giving the mortar a max potential DPS of 1,824.48, which is 410.52 DPS less than our pursuits. Although the mortar still has a huge advantage in terms of value, with the max level only costing 34,600 cash. That gives it a value of 13.18, which is nearly twice as good as the pursuit, but you really can't brush past that difference in total DPS. In terms of raw damage, the bottom path pursuit can be considered the new best form of crowd control, but if you're looking for value, the Golden Pyromancer and Mortar still have it beat. With this in mind, there isn't really a better path for this tower. They both have their advantages, with top path overall being more consistent damage and having better coverage because of its hidden detection, but bottom path being disgustingly good against crowds. I'd say it's a good idea to get a mix of both, and that's honestly one of the most powerful traits of this tower. Because it's basically a DPS tower and a splash attacking tower smashed into one, it frees up a tower slot in your loadout, which you can now use for some kind of support like the DJ booth or electroshocker. There's another huge advantage with this tower, and that's the fact that it can be fully buffed by support. The Engineer, which has been the strongest DPS tower for a while now, does technically deal more DPS, with 6 max Engineers having a combined DPS of 2,414.52 DPS, and 5 max top half pursuits only dealing 1,732 DPS. However, the sentries from the Engineer cannot be buffed by anything, so even with the 50% fire rate buff from the Commander and 20% damage buff from the DJ booth, they only gain an extra 394.75 DPS for a total of 2,809.27 DPS. The pursuits, however, can be fully buffed, so they gain an extra 1,385.6 DPS for a whopping 3,117.6 DPS. The Engineer still has an advantage in terms of value, with an impressive 7.49 DPS per 1k spent at max level. That is 37% better value than the pursuit, but because of the fact that it has over 300 more potential DPS than the Engineer, technically full map range, complete stun immunity, and you don't have to worry about it not having any sentries built, I consider the pursuit to potentially be the best DPS tower in the game. Take that with a grain of salt though, as I haven't tested it enough to say this with complete confidence. Still, with all of these advantages and amazing stats, I'm gonna rank this tower as an easy high S tier. The only downside to this tower is its mediocre value, but everything else is incredible. The 2 upgrade paths make it super versatile, and I suspect that we'll be seeing a lot of pursuit in future strategies. And with that, that's it for this video. Let me know in the comments below how you feel about this tower and if you agree with my ranking. And if you enjoyed, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to join the Blue Head Mafia. Also, if you want to talk to me, consider checking out my Discord. We got some pretty cool features, like a custom party finder bot that will automatically pair you up with other people who are trying to do the same strategy. There's a link to the server pinned in the comments. And finally, I want to give a huge shout out to these channel members for supporting my content. If you want to add me as a friend on Roblox or get early access to some of my videos, consider becoming a channel member. It helps me out a lot and I really appreciate it. Anyways, that's it for this video, and I'll see you guys in the next one.